What if the world was one giant country? Well, there have been many collections of nations over humanity's long history, from the war alliances of old to institutions like the European Union and the United Nations today. There has never been a government on Earth that's combined all of our world's countries. However, with the rise of the internet and other technologies that make our planet more interconnected and dependent on one another than ever before, it's interesting to take a look at exactly what would happen if all of the world was united as one giant country. Now, such a huge change in the overall state of the planet is obviously going to come with both pros and cons. So let's take a look at the bright side first. If Earth was all comprised of one country, we would ideally have some sort of unified government, and thus would be able to tackle problems collectively that might otherwise see some friction between separate nations, such as climate change. Getting the United States, Russia, and China to all equally lower their rates of greenhouse gases and fossil fuels would be an incredibly difficult negotiating feat to pull off, whereas if all of these regions belonged to the same country, it would likely be much easier to coordinate. The same would go for the outbreak of diseases or rallying together against natural disasters caused by the climate change that's already occurred on the planet so far. Instead of arguing with one another and having to constantly figure out the cost and benefit of cutting out greenhouse gases at a faster rate than competitive countries, we would hopefully be able to focus on hitting the goals that actually need to be hit and doing what we can to make the planet better for everyone's health, not just the benefit of a few wealthier countries. Another huge pro for the one country side of the argument would be the denuclearization of the planet's weaponry and arms supply. The primary reason for the continued existence of nuclear weapons today is as a deterrent from other countries seeking to potentially use the technology themselves, with an estimated 17,000 nuclear bombs still in existence throughout the world. If the world was only composed of one country, the need for weaponry that dangerous would no longer be required. Although, side note from the discussion at hand, maybe some spare missiles in case of intergalactic alien invasion might be handy to keep around. But without the need to fight over territory or specific areas on Earth, more resources could be allocated to the locations that need it, and hopefully the average level of quality of life on the planet would increase overall from a more equal distribution of resources. The military could focus on infrastructure improvements in the areas that would sorely need it, rather than having to focus on exploiting and destroying the infrastructure of an enemy nation. Likewise, scientific advancements in areas such as rocket technology would no longer have to be seen through the lens of military use, but rather could simply be researched for the benefit of humanity and increasing our understanding of science and the stars. However, all of these pros are more easily said than done, and a huge issue and the major con to the entire concept is just how incredibly difficult it would be to organize in the first place. Running a country is a difficult enough task, with multiple levels of government, regional considerations, and literally millions of variables to keep track of. Make it a country big enough for the entire population of 7.8 billion people, and those complications become exponentially more difficult to deal with. Furthermore, just because we suddenly were united under the label of one country doesn't mean our differences would just immediately go away. While obviously cooperation would be the goal, there are thousands of years of conflict, regional differences, and other interlocking issues that would have to be delicately dealt with in order for this new society to actually flourish. Would previous countries now be considered states under this new system? Would any of these border lines between states have to be redrawn to keep the country as a whole unified? All of these are huge questions that would have to be answered, to say nothing about all the other transition-related questions, such as how currency would work under this new one-country system, and how all of the different businesses, previously from different nations, would now interact and trade with one another under the same national umbrella. Another huge issue with the world being just one country is how exactly we would transition to that sort of system in the first place, and how the leadership of our new global country would function. While it could be argued that a democracy would be the best form of government for a world-spanning country to take, there's many different forms and levels of democracy in place in countries all over the world, and getting the population of the planet to agree on which method would be the best one for their new country would be a difficult prospect, let alone taking into consideration anyone who would attempt to abuse the global country system to achieve power. The leadership of this country, no matter how they're elected, would hold perhaps the most power a single human being has wielded throughout all of human history, with very few exceptions. Ensuring that this position was highly vetted and impossible to abuse would be essential to forming any sort of world government. Furthermore, we need to take a look at how this government even begins to be formed in the first place. How do you even begin to assemble over 200 countries together into one singular entity and get them all to agree to the exact same laws, rules, and oversight? Many countries would be against the idea of losing their independence, and even if the push for a singular country was coming from far larger countries with a bit more bargaining power, these independent nations would need to be absolutely assured that they can continue to enjoy the aspects of their independence that most matter to them and their constituents, or that these nations' situations would objectively be massively improved by the increase in allocated resources. But again, who is deciding how these resources should be allocated? What's to stop the larger countries from teaming up to push out the smaller regions and take advantage of their resources? At least with our current more independent system, national borders are more strictly valued by the United Nations, and any invasion of a bordering country would be met with scorn from the rest of the world. But if everyone was already under the same leadership umbrella, there is the worry that such complaints would fall on deaf ears if it wound up being considered the better option by leadership of our global country. All in all, if the world was combined together into one giant country, who knows whether we'd be better or worse off than we are right now. So many aspects of our lives would change, and the task of organizing the entire world would be such an enormous obstacle to overcome that the potential for disaster or negating any upsides is high. However, it's an interesting topic to wonder about, and no matter how many countries the future of the world holds, we should all strive to live as if we are all neighbors and members of the same planet in the first place, regardless of all the laws and reasons for separate countries that we have. So if you enjoyed this video, be sure to hit the like button, hit the subscribe button, and let us know what questions you'd like to see answered next on this channel. As always, I've been Josh Busker, and this has been Life's Biggest Questions.